Welcome, everyone. And we are here to commemorate World Mental Health Day. And I am thrilled to have two incredibly special guests with me here today. We have Kevin Briggs, Sergeant Kevin Briggs, as well as JD Schramm. As we always do, if you wouldn't mind, we've got a good group of people coming in today. We've got about 80 plus people who are joining us today. Please go ahead and write in the chat where you're coming from. I personally am in San Francisco. Kevin, can you tell us where you are?
Sure, I am in Petaluma, Sonoma County, California.
Awesome. And how about you, JD?
Halfway between the two of you, San Rafael.
Okay, great. Welcome. So again, as we always do, after you've shared where you're coming from, this is really designed to be a raw, honest, open conversation. Both Kevin and JD have incredible stories to share. Please share your comments and ask any questions. In particular, I'm seeing here Meredith. I'm so glad you're here with us. Meredith is another fellow activator in the field of workplace well-being. And Kevin, as I mentioned to you before, she's been sharing your story already. So, and JD, really excited to share your story with people. So it looks like we've got people coming in from New Jersey. We've got San Diego, Burlington, Vermont, Ithaca, New York, another from Vermont, Escondido, California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, all kinds of different places. So first and foremost, allow me to introduce you to JD Schramm. JD is a celebrated communicator and educator. He combines his personal experiences with depression and suicide, a suicide attempt, with his expertise in teaching to empower individuals in sharing their narratives. And JD, I have to say that one of the ways that you do empower people to share their narratives is by sharing your own. And again, I want to thank you so much for the courage that it's taking to be here today and to share your narrative. And this narrative is so important for others to hear. JD is also an active advocate in the LGBTQ community, and he has notably contributed to inclusion efforts in both education and faith communities. He volunteers with the Crisis Text Line, something that we'll be talking about when we talk about resources. He's delivered an amazing TED Talk on suicide attempt survivors. This has been seen by more than 2 million different viewers. And he currently is working on a memoir, The Bridge Back, One Man's Journey from the Edge of Death to the Center of Life. JD, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Laura.
And then our other guest here is Sergeant Kevin Briggs, also known as the Guardian of the Golden Gate. And this is actually the title of his book, which I highly recommend. And you'll learn more about the significance behind that name. But he has saved countless lives on the iconic Golden Gate Bridge. And he possesses a rare gift, which is the ability to make a connection with strangers when they need it most. And, you know, Kevin, one of the things that I've really been touched by in our conversations is this idea that we all have this gift of being able to listen to one another, and that we all can tap into this. And so in you sharing about how you've been able to really tap into this innate gift that we all have, innate gift as in no expertise required, just being a fellow human being. We all can be advocates for change in this. Kevin is a former California Highway Patrol Sergeant, now a global champion for mental health awareness, suicide prevention, and crisis management. He has been spotlighted in various media outlets, and he also has delivered a TED Talk. And I just wanted to share also, Kevin, the fact that I first heard your story while driving across the Golden Gate Bridge, listening to an incredible NPR story. And I know that there are others who have also heard your story who are on the call today. So this conversation today is a unique one. This is a coming together of a survivor, namely JD, and a savior, if you will, who is Kevin. And so with that, JD, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your heartfelt story with all of us. And again, thank you so much to both of you for being here.
Thank you, Laura, for having the foresight to put this together and to connect Kevin and I for this conversation. I really do want it to be a conversation. I told Laura in the prep, I'm used to teaching in 45 to 90-minute chunks. So if I need to be cut off, go for it. And I also don't have any slides today. This is just all JD. So my story briefly was just over 20 years ago, June of 2003. And it's the most dramatic attempt at ending my life, and the one that June 11th nearly became the date on my tombstone. But it wasn't the first. It was at least the third. And it was the day that my life pivoted, that really my near fatal attempt gave me a second chance at life and a renewed focus at life. The story briefly is that I struggle with drugs and alcohol. I had been living in Kansas where I grew up, went back to New York City where I had lived for many years, and had another slip with drugs and alcohol. And I was like, I'm just not going to get this. I'm going to be one of those people who never recovers. And made the choice to end my life. I originally thought I would try to make it look like an accident and fall in front of a moving train. I didn't do that, and I wandered around the city for hours and ultimately decided to try to take my life by jumping from the Manhattan Bridge, another iconic bridge on the other side of the country. I don't like to talk about a lot of the details of that. I will just say, and after having read Kevin's book, I paced back and forth before I did what I did, and I climbed up to the edge of the fence and climbed back down, and then prayed. And I didn't pray to be saved. I prayed to be forgiven in my faith. I was like, what I'm doing is really wrong. And climbed up to the top and leapt. And I did a lot of physical damage to my body. I crushed my ribs, broke my left arm. And as Kevin notes in his book, many people die of the injuries in the water. And fortunately, for whatever reason, I did not. And I floated in and out of consciousness and underneath another bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and out into the pathway of the Staten Island ferry, where people on the ferry heard my cries of pain and of help, and alerted the captain, who alerted the Coast Guard, who got a boat to me, ultimately taken to Bellevue Hospital, where I spent 23 days recovering from the injuries I had done. And so as I tell that, I get a little choked up, but I'm present to, especially with Kevin here, there was a team of people who didn't know each other at all, who were more committed to my life that night than I was. And I'm here today because of their coordination and their efforts. And every day I have since June 11th, 2003 is a gift.
Thank you so much for sharing that, JD. And you know, when you and I first talked about having this conversation, you shared, when I first suggested the idea that we bring both of you together, you shared that this could serve as a healing opportunity for you, in a sense, to be able to symbolically say thank you to all of those people who were there when you needed it the most. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Kevin, as I think about all the people that you were able to interact with and intersect with, which we'll hear about in a minute, I never got to go back and thank anybody. I tried. The medical records were sketchy in terms of who fished me out of the water and who handed me off to the ambulance and who handed me off to the doctors, and those records I have. But the first responders, I never got to say thank you, and I'm here because of them. And this was in New York City about a year and a half after 9/11. And so I'm just grateful for the people in your profession who do so much for so many of us. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So Kevin, with that, your story kind of on the other side of this, of this experience. And Kevin, before you begin your story, one of the things I also really was touched by is in sharing one of the stories, which is about your interaction and now your very ongoing close friendship with Kevin Berthia. And I hope I'm saying his name correctly. That in that picture where you are bringing him back, that you describe how at any moment it could be any of us on either side. So
Absolutely.
with that, if you would kindly share your story of patrolling the iconic Golden Gate Bridge for 17 years.
Sure. And I agree with you. And I'm very privileged and honored to be with you both. Thank you. When I first started working on that bridge, I came from San Quentin. I wasn't in there as an inmate. I worked there for a couple of years. I was in the United States Army in the infantry, these macho jobs, and then over to San Quentin, and then the highway patrol. And I wondered why. I'm from Marin. Marin connects to San Francisco via that Golden Gate Bridge. And I wondered why a lot of officers didn't want to work on that bridge. I found out really quick. I wound up handling 4 to 6 cases a month of people actively suicidal. But I had no training, didn't know what to do, what to say, how to approach. So every single person that I spoke with, I would ask them, what could I have done better? What did I do that maybe wasn't so good? To be a good negotiator. And it was years until I went through negotiator school with the FBI and all these different things. But I have to tell you, you cannot have an ego and be a good negotiator, in my opinion, for something like this. It has to be about that individual, whether you're speaking to them, on the sidewalk, in the parking lot, over the rail. It is always, always, always about them. What can we do to find reason, purpose, hope, without lying to them, without trying to fix things, because we can't, but to be there for them and allow them to speak. And I've developed a way of doing this to where I think it works, and it works for me. Are we going to be able to help everybody? And you see, I try to get away from that word save. I don't think I saved anybody. I was there on a dark day for them and assisted them through a dark time. And that's what so many people do. But as we have spoken about this in the past, it is about getting to people long before they get to that bridge, long before they get to that building or a weapon to their head. And that's why I'm so thankful for something like this today, to talk to folks, to let them know there are people and resources out there for them. But this was my journey through this, and I retired early from the Highway Patrol to come out and do this now and travel and speak, and it has been a blessing. I've never worked harder in my life, I think, but it has been a privilege and an honor to do this.
So Kevin, first of all, thank you so much for your service, and walk us through a little bit more those 17 years when you were patrolling Golden Gate Bridge, and just tell us more about what that actually looked like. Were you actually walking and looking for people who seemed like they were at that point of crisis? Were you looking for someone who was perhaps doing, as JD was describing, pacing back and forth? And then walk us through the process, even sharing some of the stories of those moments when you intervened.
Sure. So most people know there are a lot of bridge on that bridge, a lot of cameras on that bridge, even down below it. So we have cameras there watching for folks, and then the Golden Gate Bridge personnel would contact us. I rode a motorcycle, so part of my beat was that Golden Gate Bridge. It's not the only thing. We handled a lot of different areas there, but we were looking for people who may be solo. That's the big one. They're by themselves. That's a big one. And you get a lot of people there who are by themselves, who are taking pictures, who aren't contemplating suicide. This is a very small portion of the people who come to visit the bridge. but it's one we definitely watch for. So we would watch for somebody pacing, or maybe walking up and then walking back to their car and then walking back again, contemplating things. But I will tell you, as far as teenagers, their frontal lobe isn't developed until they're age 25, 26, 27. They are very impulsive. So generally they'll come up and walk around a bit and then just jump and they're gone. Very seldom do we get the opportunity to speak with them. That is a tough one. But we're looking for people who are more than likely solo, walking around. Are they waiting for people not to be around them? Because a lot of times they don't want other people to witness what they may be going to do, and they don't want other people coming up and trying to talk them out of it most of the time. So I think JD can address this even further, but this is what we're looking for. And if I would get a call, for instance, one time I got a call of an elderly gentleman over the pedestrian rail, standing on what we call the cord. It is an I-beam that parallels the Golden Gate Bridge, except for around the two towers. But I had a call of an elderly gentleman over the rail, standing on the cord. I rode up on my motorcycle, and I want to empower folks. So instead of just walking up to someone and initiating a conversation, I stay back about 15 feet or so, and I raise my right hand. Hi, I'm Kevin. Is it okay if I come up and talk with you for a while? I want to empower them right from the start. Maybe folks have seen where officers or firemen or even a citizen rush up on a building or a bridge and they grab an individual and pull them over. I don't do that. I think it takes so much courage to go over that rail to begin with. Imagine the courage that it takes to come back over that rail. If we can get that person to do that on their own, we will assist them once they want to. But if I can get them to want to come back on their own, I think they'll have much greater courage in continuing on with their life. So this is my goal that I've kind of developed through the years. But an elderly gentleman over the rail, he had just had a tough time all his life, drugs and alcohol. He had a very small apartment in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is a very, very tough neighborhood. He really didn't have anything and no reason to live. So I'm talking to him, and I have to find what we call in negotiators world hooks, things that maybe we have in common. Commonalities can create comfort, or maybe that he likes to talk about. So he really didn't have anything, but just to continue this conversation and allow him to talk, I asked him, what is your apartment like? What do you have in there? I've never been into an apartment in the Tenderloin. I hear it's a tough area. So as he's describing it, his very small bed and a dresser and things. Well, on top of my dresser, I have my goldfish. So I thought, your goldfish. All right. Tell me about your goldfish. Does your goldfish have a name? And we talked for quite a while about this goldfish, because that was the only thing that I could grasp onto that he has that may be able to just give him some hope and reason and purpose. So I focused on this for some time. And then I asked him, sir, if you decide to jump today, who's going to feed your goldfish? Now, you see, when people are suicidal, when they're actively suicidal, they don't see tomorrow. This has been my experience. Now, JD can address this greater than I can, but just in my experience, they don't see tomorrow. I've seen this time and time and time again. This gentleman did not think about this. So when I asked him this, sir, who's going to feed your goldfish? He really thought about this because he did not plan on being here tomorrow. He eventually came back over the rail because of that goldfish, because that was all that he really cared about. That was in his life. So we know if we can get someone past this crisis, that a lot of times they won't attempt again. If we can get them the right help. And something else for folks is somebody may be contemplating suicide for quite some time, but when they say, you know what, now's the time, 48% will attempt within 20 minutes. So we need to get to those folks long before this. And I've seen it time and time again. I love doing studies and research, but I got to put it into reality, talking to folks like JD and what can we do better? Getting to folks long before they get to that bridge. But we have to find out with folks. We need to have these conversations long before they get up there. But this gentleman came over because of this goldfish, which very, very trivial to us, but to him meant the world. This is what it's about.
And I would love to, well, first of all, there's just this, there's no judgment around what matters to me might be completely different to what matters to you. I think we sometimes go for the more obvious things. I know, Kevin, that there were other instances where, for example, it was someone's children that brought them back. But sometimes it might be something unexpected like this. I want to talk a little bit more about, Kevin, when you were on the bridge, there were very specific signs that you were looking for, and things like someone being alone, someone pacing. But JD, you shared earlier about how you actually fit the category of someone who did everything possible to hide any of these warning signs. Perhaps you showed some warning signs right beforehand, but if we're going upstream just a little bit with one person, often we don't see anything. And it's heartbreaking to hear the number of cases in which people share, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear both of your perspectives, because this is kind of the classic approach to addressing rising rates of mental health issues, and particularly this heartbreaking issue of suicide prevention, is to look for the warning signs, to tune into the warning signs. So let's talk a little bit about those warning signs and how we might go a little deeper. So JD, I'd love to start with you, and then let's hear from Kevin.
Sure. I did try really hard in the hours leading up to my attempt to send out distractions. I did not want anybody to know how desperate I was and how difficult things were. And so I was trying to keep up a facade of it's all together, everything's gonna be fine, I've got it all worked out. And on the inside, I didn't. And I didn't have someone I could trust, someone that I didn't feel I had someone I could trust. A ton of people could have been trusted. I wasn't willing to take the risk. And so I made phone calls to people. I left voicemail messages that were all upbeat, that were all positive. I was sending smoke signals so that nobody knew what I was considering doing. But I do think, in preparing for this conversation, had someone cut through all of that, like Kevin describes, the conversations he's had, I think I would have responded to that. I think I would have said, "Oh my God, you're right. Like this is not what I need to do right now." But I didn't let the people close to me know what was going on, and so they didn't have anything to watch for in terms of signals in that regard.
And I apologize for that. Kevin, talk a little bit, again, given how, someone may be likely to show smoke signals and actually demonstrate distractions, what are some of those warning signs that we might look for? And in particular, you talk about this idea of kind of breaking through the bubble that many people construct around themselves.
Sure. So I look for, mind you, not when it's obvious up on the bridge or something, but talk, behavior, and mood. We've got to narrow it down. Talk, behavior, and mood. What have they been talking about? And like JD said, people are good at hiding things also. They really are. But we have to have somewhere to start. Are they talking about not being here? Are they talking about being a burden to their families? Nobody loves them being overwhelmed with their circumstances, everything that has happened. Their behavior, what have they been doing? Have they started taking risks? Are they drinking, abusing drugs, sleeping a lot more? Some will say sleeping less. I tend to go with sleeping more, because if you're abusing drugs and alcohol and you're sleeping more, you're not in that big emotional pain that you would be in at that particular time. So talk, behavior, taking risks is a big one. What has changed with them? They used to come out and have coffee with you a few days a week. And now they're staying home. They don't want to come out. Not only are they isolating themselves at home, but they're isolating themselves to a room. I've seen that time and time again. And then their mood, what has changed? Do they seem like they're depressed? They're just unhappy. They're not interested in things that used to bring them joy. What has changed? And of course, not everybody is suicidal, but they may be going through a really rough time. So how about having a chat with them somewhere where they are comfortable, not a local coffee shop or somewhere out in public, and ask them, you know what? I've been noticing this, and this. I want to let you know I'm here for you. Anytime you want to call me 24 hours a day. If I can't pick up right then, I will as soon as I can. Whatever you're going through, you do not have to go through this alone.
Yes.
That's a big one. And then validating what they're going through and normalizing what they're going through. And by validating someone, you know what? That sounds really tough, all that stuff. And then there are a number of things, you know what? Anybody going through all that, maybe thinking about suicide. Have you been thinking about killing yourself? You just normalize what that individual is going through, so they're not sitting in a corner all by themselves thinking they're the only ones going through this, nobody else has. If you could normalize this, even when I teach negotiators, a lot of them don't use this. And I believe it's really, really important.
And
Kevin, if I can jump in there, I think that many of us, and Kevin and I are both lay people. All three of us are lay people. Laura has more expertise. We have our experiences, but there are people who are afraid if they bring up suicide, that they will cause somebody to think about suicide. That's not what the research shows. That's not what I have read. And if anything, the word can pierce that bubble and go, how could you tell? I mean, I was, but I'm not now, whatever. And by us bringing it up, we are not going to cause somebody to think about it, but we may cause somebody to talk about it and step further away from the bridge or further away from whatever they may be considering. And that's probably one of the best strategies for lay people, is just don't be afraid to bring up the word and to put the question out there, so that you're not dealing with what you think may be happening, but you're dealing with what they're saying.
Right.
Well, I think that there's so much, shrouded so much of this in being a mental health expert, and people saying, well, I'm not a mental health expert, but we are all human beings. And yes, we need expertise, but at the same time, just relying on the expert is not enough. We need to be connecting with one another as humans. So I would just love to hear from both of you around how much we have been set back in some ways by this need for expertise. And as we're doing this, please post your questions or comments. We've been getting so many comments of gratitude to both of you for sharing your stories. Lots of comments around how helpful this conversation has been. So thank you. Keep those comments coming, but also please share your questions with these two incredible human beings. And I know that they would be happy to respond to those questions as they come in. So while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, if each of you could speak a little bit to this piece about the need to be the expert. And Kevin, why don't we start with you, and then JD will bring it to you.
Sure. Can you think of a tougher conversation to have? Nobody wants to do this. But you know what? I didn't see some signs from my own boy and almost lost my boy who was suicidal. We went to a mental health professional, and I'll be very honest with you folks. I don't believe that individual was trained in suicide assessment, because it was a horrible experience. And the only reason I know is because the work that I do and the study that I do and the people that I talk to, like you both. But I get to speak with a lot of mental health professionals now, and more and more getting trained in suicide assessment. And they're wonderful to work with, and they can get you some coping skills and different things to follow. But it's a very tough conversation. But if we don't have it, we're losing over 48,000 people in this country alone every year. You can be that one individual that say, you know what, I'm going to have this conversation. Because remember, it may be hard for us. Imagine how hard it is for them.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. It's about them. So, it's about bringing them together, letting them know you may not be able to fix anything, nor probably can't, but by being there, allow them to speak. And I will tell you another couple of things for when we talk about negotiations. Let them speak. I go by 80-20 for the most part. Let them speak 80% of the time, with me 20%. Because when I'm speaking, what am I learning? Nothing. When they're speaking, I'm learning more. They're being allowed to vent. So we use what we call minimal encouragers. Is that right? Really? Wow. And they know that I'm listening, and they can just continue on, and I'm gathering more info to be able to help them so we can get them the help that they need.
And if I can just respond to that really quickly, I think so often with good intention, we start telling our own stories, or perhaps, oh, I heard of, my friend was contemplating suicide, and then she did X. So why don't you try this? We go into problem solving mode, as opposed to, as you spoke about, just keeping the conversation focused on them, allowing them to really share their voice. And this is, again, something that we can all do. We can all do. JD, how about your thoughts on this?
I just agree so fully with everything that Kevin is saying. So if you were looking for a good Jerry Springer kind of debate, I don't think Kevin and I are going to be able to deliver that this morning. The best thing we can do is ask questions and then shut up and listen, and let the other person talk. I was stunned when I trained to be a crisis counselor for the crisis text line. The very first lesson was listening skills. And I teach communication for a living. I've written books about it, I'm like, there is no listening going on. It's a text message. What do you mean listening skills? And they were absolutely right. It's being able to listen through what is being typed, and to ask those questions. Like we call them tentifiers, but I wonder how that felt for you, rather than how did you feel? I'm curious. Has that happened before? Those sorts of soft conversation pieces allow the other person to just talk more and share more, and to listen, whether spoken or typed, listen through what is there and give them more room to share. I've heard people say, well, they're just doing this to get attention. Okay, give them some attention. Let's give them what they need. If they're feeling like they're isolated or invisible, give them that conversation. Offer to go with them to a recovery meeting or a therapy session, or to get the help they need. Be there as a guide or an ambassador, and don't feel like you have to be the expert, but help them define the expertise that they need in their situation.
So I think a lot of this, we're having a conversation about, really downstream. And one of the things that you've both spoken about is, how do we do a better job of reaching people before they step onto a bridge, for example. And so we're kind of in that crisis management moment. And this is certainly something, I think, a really important message to leaders in organizations around what they can be doing. No, you don't have to be a therapist, but here's something that you can do. And to set up this next question, I want to kick this off with a story, which is a story that was covered in the New York Times in September of 2019. So the story is that there was one naval ship in 1 week that had 3 suicides. Now, this was on the heels of the military, in particular, the Navy, having invested heavily in providing mental health resources for troops and having very similar conversations to the one that we are having now, which is about identifying the warning signs and identifying those individuals who are at risk and connecting them with the resources that they need. However, as brought up by a very insightful psychologist who was interviewed for the article, who asked the question, might it be wise to start to address the environment itself, as in the work environment itself, which may be driving some of these troops to become suicidal in the first place? So things like toxicity tolerated, or things like extreme time pressure, or things like extreme levels of hierarchy. So, the question that I often ask leaders to consider is the question, is your workplace or even your team a naval ship in the making, if you will? So, I would love to hear both of your perspectives on this. And perhaps we could start with you this time, JD, around this idea of really starting to go upstream.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are responsible as leaders for the environment in our team, our community, our school, our workplace, and to be able to look carefully at the environment and what is it that is causing these pressures. What is it that is creating this sense of hopelessness or futility that would make people consider ending their life? And can I do something about that pressure? The one I see the most, again, coming from my experience as a gay man, is the experience that a lot of LGBTQ youth have in schools, in churches, where they are told they are not welcome, and continue to hear that. We see in the gay community as much as 3 times the rate of the non-gay kids of suicide and suicide attempts. And it's like, okay, that's not because they're gay. That's because of the environment that they're growing up in that tells them it's wrong to be gay. And so as an employer, I would look at the same things. Are there pressures that I'm putting in place that make it harder for people to do their work and be themselves? And that's where I would look.
And Kevin, what are your thoughts? And I just love also, JD, I just want to highlight that as leaders, we are responsible for the environment. We are responsible for the environment and the culture. Kevin, some thoughts from you.
I agree with you both 100%. All I would add to that was know your people. Now, a general probably is not going to know the privates, an admiral down to the enlisted folks, but you know your folks who directly come to you. They know it all the way down. What type of example are you setting for them? Lead by example. When I talk to folks in my line of employment for law enforcement, I said, what does it say on a lot of police cars? Protect and serve. That's what the officers do. As you get into sergeants and lieutenants and captains, we need to take that onto our troops. Protect and serve our troops. Allow them to do the job, but be mindful of what they're doing, what has been going on with them. So, I just very briefly wanted to add that on to you to be able to set an example and protect and serve who works for us.
And I want to be sure that in the course of our conversation that we share some of the many resources that are out there. Marianne Pelletier is sharing, for example, our Canadian leaders and members took the Mental Health First Aid Certificate program from Ontario Shores. It was absolutely excellent. So there's a resource. Anybody else who would like to share resources, please go ahead and do so. Aid training was helpful. Mackenzie shares. Thank you for that. And the Heinlein maneuver was expected, or the Heimlich maneuver. Yes, absolutely. We were talking a little bit about this, same thing with like administering CPR. How do we make this accessible so that everyone feels equipped to be able to step up to the moment? Kevin, what are some resources that people need to be aware of?
Sure. We did have a number for a long time, 1-800-273-TALK here in the United States. That has now changed to 3 digits, 988. JD's going to bring up one that is very dear to my heart. Look at getting some training. that's out there for you. You know, QPR, assist, look at living works, mental health first aid. All of those are going to teach you a little bit different, but a lot of the same stuff. And it's wonderful training, and it will help you throughout your life talking to folks, not just in cases like this. But I'm a big believer in 988, the suicide or its crisis line, and look at what is available in your community. So, and then I know JD has.
The one I'll add to it is 741-741, which if you look at a phone, you just go up the left side, 741-741, and it's very easy to memorize that number. I'm thrilled here in California, and I think in 12 or 13 other states, it is printed on the back of students' ID cards at their high school, like 988 and 741-741, so that we just there are signs now on the bridge that are up there for both helplines. 988, I love that it's national and it's both call and text, which is great. Sometimes those are handled regionally. Here in Marin County, Buccaloo program fields a lot of those calls, and some of them roll over depending on staffing to the crisis text line. So I know when I'm a counselor to somebody, how did they find us? I've only had one time that it has been a sign on the Golden Gate Bridge, but I'm like, I'm 11 miles away, and I know that sign. I know where you're at. And so I think both of those are great. And then those organizations have wonderful resources on their website, places that you can guide people to get more help. But the more that we just, I think you used the word normalize, the more that we just make this available, that I don't have to search for the number for 911 anymore. Okay. And I shouldn't have to search for 988 or 741-741.
So I want to make sure that people know how to stay in touch with you and what resources they should be aware of that you each individually have to offer. JD, I'll start with you. If you could just briefly share the best way for people to follow your work, to stay in touch with you.
Easiest way is just on my website. It's just my name, jdschramm.com. And I do a newsletter on communication tips that I don't charge for. I have a lot of resources that are up there. And although professionally I do coaching and speaking, this is a topic area that I do at no charge. And so if there are questions or resources around this that I can help guide somebody to, I'm glad to do that in addition to the work I do on helping people write and speak better.
Wonderful. And it looks like we've got a couple of points that Mackenzie said that mental health first aid training has really helped. Marianne also added that apparently a woman by the name of Christina Fuda is also a great resource. Kevin, how can people follow your work and stay in touch with you as well?
Sure. I have an organization myself, Pivotal Points. So www.pivotal-points.com. You can probably just sounds egotistical, but Google the name Kevin Briggs and it'll come up to something or other. So that I do presentations now besides the book that's out. And, I travel all over, whether that's community groups, whether it's high schools, whether it's military. So this affects everybody, and it should go out to everybody. How can we talk to folks? What are the conversations we can have? What do we say? What do we not say? What do we do with someone who may be in crisis? What can we offer them? So I talk about a crisis safety plan and different aspects of how we can stay mentally well.
And all of this really connects with the idea of connection. Ultimately, we want to know that we're not alone and that we are connected to one another, which is actually a lead into my conversation next month on November 15th. At the same time, 10 to actually 10:30, I will be interviewing, my guest will be Jessica Grossmeyer. So please join us for that. With that, I would really love to hear from each of you in this broad-reaching conversation that we've had. And particularly, I want to add a little bit of a twist to this, which is particularly in thinking about how often the people who need to be hearing this message the most are often the people who are the hardest to reach. So, and the industries that need it most. For example, construction industry has a second highest rate of suicide, second to veterans, are often the most resistant to this. So, what is the one thing that you would like our listeners to come away with in 30 seconds or less? Kevin, we'll start with you, and then JD will wrap it up with you.
I want you to put yourself on top. So many times in the construction industry, rate of 55 per 100,000 individuals lose their life to suicide, more than double that of cops. But all of us, folks in the mental health field and all, be able to put yourself on top for a while, because most of us, we give, and we fail to see what's going on with us. How are you doing? Okay, start it with us. So serve yourself. What are you doing for yourself? That would be my big one on this.
Fill your bucket first. Yeah. And I think something that's so overlooked. JD, how about you?
I'm going to paraphrase what Kevin said earlier. Be courageous. I never thought before, Kevin, that it takes courage for that person to step onto that railing, and it takes even more courage for them to step back off that railing. And it takes an equal amount of courage to have those conversations. And so be courageous. And as we know, that's not acting without fear. It's acting in the face of fear. So take some risks, be courageous, have these conversations, and let's see what can happen. I think a lot is possible if we can be courageous.
And with that, Kevin, thank you so much for being our guest. And JD, thank you so much for being our counter guest, if you will. Bringing the two of you together, I know, was really impactful for me. And based on the comments that we were receiving, I know that it meant a lot to the people who had this wonderful opportunity to be able to hear the two of you in conversation, to hear not only your expertise, but more importantly, your human stories. So with gratitude, not only to the two of you, but also to AJ, Alana, and to all of our listeners. We'll look forward to seeing you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Laura.